And the moment this loads, it's going to get really weird. Live streaming is not for me, folks.
The more I do it, the more I think it's not for me either.
You're so good at it, though. All right. Well, so we are in April. Welcome, everybody. I hope you're doing well, feeling well, and your loved ones and families and friends are too. Really excited this month to balance out the program a little bit, talk about performance, talk about communication, talk about as Mike said, the hard things, soft skills. And so I'm going to be introducing our speaker very quickly, or very soon, but very quickly. I want to let you know that I have recently updated, of course, menu bar, go away. The 4x4 method has some new information. If you haven't checked that out, check that out. Also, value stream link, I've put probably another, it's about 50 to 60% bigger now. It's got a bunch of extra resources. So check that out. Go have a look. And very soon I'll be introducing Amber, who's going to be talking about the power of performance feedback. Before I get to that, I want to introduce something from our sponsor, JFrog. They're having a Swamp Up conference. So this is one of their big conferences, if not the biggest. You can see the dates, May 25th to 27th and June 1st to 3rd. So 2 events, 2 different time zones. So if you miss one, if you get the days wrong, you might be able to catch up on the other. But I've posted some details in Slack. I will follow up with any details that Ari sends me about that. And of course, thank you to JFrog for sponsoring the meetup and being a big supporter. Speaking of that, next month we are having Baruch come and talk about security and DevOps. So it's a big topic. It seems like it keeps getting bigger and bigger. And so we want to balance out our program with talking about security every once in a while. So we're going to bring him in to talk about security and DevOps. I know he's a big value chain fan, supply chain fan. And because of all the vulnerabilities we keep reading about, all the breaches we keep reading about, I think this is very relevant. So stay tuned, sign up for that. We'll be announcing that. I think it might also already be announced, but we'll be announcing it, if not today, tomorrow, so that you can sign up for that too and join us next month. With that, I am going to quit sharing my screen because Amber's going to take over. And I am going to let her run the show. And hopefully, so she's going to be talking for about 25, 30 minutes. Then we'll probably have some Q&A and hopefully have some time for discussion after her talk, because I think it's a subject that we all kind of struggle with constantly. And I think it's really important that we understand feedback loops and how they pertain to performance and how performance is everything. So with that, I will hand it to you, Amber. Take it away. Thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate having you here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, as stated before, my name is Amber, and we're going to be talking about feedback today. So in order to talk about feedback, I'm going to need some feedback from you. I had several people say that their video can't turn on or audio, so we're going to be using the chat quite a bit. So just to start off, I'm going to ask you some simple questions. It's a Tuesday. Go ahead and put in the chat, how are you feeling today? Are you excited? Are you exhausted? Are you overwhelmed? How are you feeling today? Go ahead and give me a little bit of feedback in the chat. Okay. All right, I'm going to grab this one. All right, so I'm getting some feedback. For that, I'm going to give you a 4 out of 10. 4 out of 10. So that's okay. Here is a Likert scale. So I'm simply giving you the number. I think we can do a lot better. So don't worry, we're going to have a chance to try again. I'm seeing some people are feeling hungry, exhausted. It's really nice outside, feeling good. Okay, so this time I'm going to ask you, how would you describe your current skill in giving feedback? Where do you think, are you super great and this is just a refresher? Do you really struggle? How would you describe yourself in giving feedback right now? Has its advantages. All right, I'm seeing a 4 out of 10. Okay, all right, I'm getting some feedback. All right, I have some different, I actually do have different options depending on what's in the chat. So for this one, all right, hate performance reviews, 5 out of 10, 6 out of 10. All right, this time I'm going to use a checkbox review. So this is going to be simply the checkbox. I want you to go faster. We're going to be more specific, and I'm looking for a specific quantity. All right, so faster or specific and a certain quantity. Let's see. For our next question, I want to know, what do you hope to learn about feedback in this session today? What are you wanting to learn about feedback in your session, in this session today? It's the biggest takeaway. What is the biggest thing that you want to learn today? Effective ways to get feedback from clients, always looking for a process you can follow. We're going to address that today. A framework, we're going to address that. Perfect. All right. Understanding how to give an effective feedback. Yeah, exactly. What is it? All right. You know, that was good. All right. So this time I'm going to do a little bit of both. So of both of the two different forms that we have already given. So I'm going to give you a 7 out of 10. That's passing. That's better. But instead of using a checkbox system, I'm going to use a description. So I'm going to get even more specific in what I'm looking for. This time, I want you to answer using words that begin with the letter A. I want you to only answer with 3 words, not less, not more. And I'm only going to give you 10 seconds to answer, all right? So here I'm being a lot more descriptive. I'm using a descriptive box, and I'm giving you a number. So you have quantitative and qualitative data for how you can improve. So last go. I want you to write down a key to great performance feedback that you know right now. Based off of what you know right now, how can you give great performance feedback? Is it accurate? Is it authentic? Is it actionable? Yeah. Actionable. Oh, can't hear you clearly. Let's see. Can you hear me better now? That's good feedback for me to know.
Yeah, it's only when you drift to the edges. And I think if you drift to the edges and then aim your mouth at your mic, then you'll be okay. But it's like, it's when you're off to the edges and then aiming away that it kind of falls off.
Okay. All right. I'm going to keep forward. All right. Well, I'm seeing a lot better answers here. So I'm going to give you a 10 out of 10. And just like that, we are 4 minutes into this presentation and you have already improved your performance, the way that you're giving performance feedback. And a lot of that depended on the type of feedback that I was giving you. By getting just a 4 out of 10, there was a lot of questions of what should we do to improve, to get a 7 out of 10, to get a 10 out of 10. But as we were getting more specific with our feedback, you all were able to be more specific in the chat to meet my expectations. And as I work with a variety of different teams, I find that oftentimes unmet performance expectations come from uncommunicated expectations. In order to have great performance feedback, we have to first create an environment for great performance. And I find that the best way we can do that is through our communication. In fact, a few years ago, I actually had the opportunity to work with a football team, a soccer team, in Bangalore, India. And I found that our teams were operating under a very strict command-obey dynamic. So our teams would come to our sessions and they would stand on a line, kick a ball, wait for instruction, and stand on a line, kick a ball, wait for direction. We do that over and over again. And what we found is that our players would perfect a task. They could kick the ball perfectly, but then they would turn to the sideline to the coach for further direction and feedback. See, they had mastered the task, but they didn't quite understand how it was applying to the overall game scenario. And oftentimes, whenever I work with teams today, a lot of development teams, we can direct a task, but then the person does not know how that task applies to the overall game scenario. And so we found that we could improve our performance by adjusting the way that we were communicating our message. And that was directing the what and the why. So what are we doing and why is that important? And the transformation that we made in football was not dramatic. It was actually very simple. Rather than standing in a line, kicking the ball, waiting for instruction, we would provide a challenge. And we would say, okay, from here, I want you to kick the ball to knock down those 3 cones. Because in order to do that, you're going to have to kick with power and precision. And in a game scenario, whenever you pass, whenever you kick, and whenever you shoot, you're also going to have to kick with power and precision. And so now our players knew with clarity what they were supposed to do and why that was important. And they were able to keep their focus on the goal. And so with that in mind, we're going to do some homework today. I want everyone to get out a piece of paper. And the expectation that you have in a dev team is probably going to be different than me coaching soccer or me coaching football. And so we're going to outline some of the performance expectations that we have of our teams today. So I want you to get out a piece of paper and I want you to turn it landscape-wise like this. And I want you to draw 1 line across horizontally and 3 lines vertically. 1 line across horizontally and 3 lines vertically. So you should have 8 boxes. This is an activity that I do at the beginning of a new project. I do this activity whenever I'm working with a new team. I also do this activity whenever I'm working with a new client. I want you to draw, understanding we're not all artists here, I want you to draw a performance expectation that you have of your team in 1 box, in the first box. So I want you to draw a performance expectation that you have of your team in a box. It could be that they show up on time, it could be an attitude, it could be the performance outcomes, right? So what does a successful sprint look like? What does a successful project look like? I want you to draw what a performance expectation is of your team. I'm going to give you 20 seconds in box 1. Whenever I say the word next, you must immediately leave this box, box 1, and go to box 2 and draw another performance expectation that you have of your team. We're going to go through all 8 boxes, 20 seconds per box till we get to the end. Does anyone have any questions before I start our timer? Okay. All right, so you're going to draw a performance expectation that you have of your team in 20 seconds. On your mark, get set, go. Let's get some royalty-free music going here. Don't worry, this is okay for YouTube. All right, next box. What is a performance expectation that you have of your team members? Okay, next box. What do you expect of your team? Why is that important? What do you expect of your team? Okay, next box. You're about halfway there. Okay, next box. What's a performance expectation that you have of your team? Next box. All right, next box. You're almost there. What's a performance expectation that you have of your team? All right, last box. Three, two, one, and stop. All right. On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being that was the easiest thing ever, I could have come up with 10 more expectations. 5 being that was the hardest thing ever, don't ever make me do that again. How was that? 5, yeah, really difficult. 4. Oh, I was thinking -5. Okay. Yeah, that was tough. Yeah, that was tough. I drew some expectations that I had of you of the audience. So here's some examples. I drew question marks. I drew people would have questions. Drew a pencil for you to participate in the activities. Heart for passionate for what you do. Yeah, smiley face, good attitude. So these are some of the expectations that I drew. Sometimes whenever I do this in a team, I'll add maybe a little bit more time. So maybe 30 seconds, 45, depending on the complexity of the team. But did everybody get 8 expectations, or did anyone stop after like box 5? Usually I find that the first, yeah, usually I find that the first like 3 or 4 come pretty naturally to me. Of course, I want you to have a good attitude. Of course, I want you to be on time. But as I get into box 6, 7, and 8, it gets a lot more difficult. We can clarify expectations a lot of different ways within teams. I like this activity because it's only a couple of minutes. And it's a really quick activity that I can do. Yeah, usually about 6. Yeah. Whenever I do this within a team, I'll actually have everybody do this activity, and then we'll share the different expectations that we have. And this is really powerful because it helps us to identify the expectations that we have of each other. There have been some teams that I've done this activity where the expectations that the team members had of each other were very, very different. And so there was a frustration in the performance within the team. And then within other teams, there's been a lot of continuity. And so it can reinforce the values and the performance expectations as well. Oftentimes, it can be about half and half. And so it opens up the door to a really good conversation of what is our expectation of time? What is our expectation of attitude? What does success actually look like? If we have anyone who are front-end developers, I've seen this 8-box challenge also used in solving challenges. So we'll say, okay, this is a challenge that we're facing. Design-wise, how could we fix this. So I've seen this used on the front end side as well. But the point of this activity is to actually identify what are the major expectations that I have of my team. I like that there are 8 boxes because generally, as I said, the first 3 or 4 expectations, they're front of mind, front and center. But as I'm challenged more through boxes 5, 6, 7, and 8, I'm really challenged to think, okay, what are some expectations that I have of my team? And I challenge you to look at that and ask yourself, does your team know those expectations? Have they been clearly communicated to your team? Again, unmet performance expectations oftentimes comes from uncommunicated performance expectations. That's a good question, Jason. So Jason asks, is there a reason to have people draw rather than write? You can write, especially if I'm doing more of a, what does this represent? It's just a different way to get ideas out. Sometimes words fail and pictures can be a good alternative. So it's not, if you want to use words instead, that's okay. I like using pictures because it's a little bit different and it encourages people to be challenged a little bit more. As I work with this activity and we're clarifying expectations, it goes back to this idea of clarifying, what do I expect of my team and why is that important? Again, in order to have great performance feedback, we must create an environment for great performance. Now, as we clearly communicated our what and our why, we're allowing space for opportunity within the how. And we're allowing space for opportunity for people to perform their best with confidence. Now, even though we have clarified our performance expectations, within the conversation of clarifying expectations, I also have a proactive conversation. A proactive conversation is just what it sounds like, a proactive conversation that I do at the beginning of a project, the beginning of a client relationship, or working with a new team. It goes something like this. At some point in this project, there's probably going to be tension. And at some point in this working relationship, performance expectations are probably not going to be met. There's going to be tension. There's going to be heat. And so while the emotions are low now, let us proactively discuss how we're going to handle that situation whenever it inevitably arises. And this does a couple things. First, it allows an opportunity for people to have a conversation. A lot of times people are hesitant to bring up frustrations within performance because they don't want to admit that there is frustration. They don't want to admit that there is a problem. Having a proactive conversation, it gives, it allows for that conversation to happen. The next thing that it does is it creates a script. So I find that most of the time whenever people are hesitant to bring up unmet performance expectations, it's because there's some ambiguity on how that conversation is going to go. With a proactive conversation, you already know a script, you know the game plan on how to address unmet performance. So this is a really great activity to do on the front end as you're beginning a project. So whenever those frustrations arise and performance expectations are not met, you already have a game plan on what to do moving forward. Now, a proactive conversation helps us to overcome one of the greatest barriers to undesired performance and addressing performance, and that is the fundamental attribution error. So the fundamental attribution error is really just a fancy way of saying that too oftentimes we judge other people by their behaviors. We judge other people by the outcomes and how they're writing code, right? We're judging other people by their actions while we judge ourselves by our intentions. And this can dramatically affect the way that we're giving our performance feedback. In fact, a few months ago, I was working with a team that had a team member that was seen as very abrupt, was seen as very abrasive. Some even said malicious. It was not welcomed whenever he was coming to meetings. And so keeping the fundamental attribution error in mind, we asked this question: what is your intention whenever you are speaking at meetings? And by asking that question, we found out that the gentleman was intending to be passionate. He was intending to be persuasive. And so by asking first, what is your intention? We identified a knowledge gap between intended behavior and perceived behavior. And we were able to enter in through more of a coaching relationship and bring the two closer together. And so even though we clarify our expectations, make sure people know what we're doing and why it's important, we have proactive conversations, unmet expectations can still happen. And so we want to be mindful of the fundamental attribution error and ask, what is your intention whenever you are acting in that way, whenever we see that behavior or those outcomes? Now, whenever you ask those questions, so we want to first ask, what is your intention? What are you trying to do? How can we help you? Then we want to get very specific to get strategic in our action steps moving forward. I find that it's really helpful to know the purpose of my performance feedback. And there are actually three major purposes to our performance feedback. The first is corrective feedback. So corrective feedback is going to be that fundamental attribution error front and center. If we see performance that is undesired to us, we want to get very specific to get strategic with our corrective feedback. Whenever I was a football coach or a soccer coach, I would have, I remember I had a young lad that would come into the huddle whenever we were losing and say with complete confidence what we needed to do to win the game. He would say, guys, we just need to play better. And while that is true, it's not specific enough for us to actually be strategic. So we want to be very specific on the action that we want changed. Also, I'm going to stay on corrective feedback for just a moment because, well, that's a lot of times where we struggle. With our corrective feedback, it's important to be very mindful of the action and not the emotion. Especially right now as people are coming back to work. I was working with one team and it was very easy to say, you are annoying me, right? We're coming back to the office. But it's important to point out the action that was annoying. So there was, I was working with this team and there was a person that was talking loud on the phone. They were bringing in a stinky lunch. They were doing actions that were annoying. So rather than saying, you're annoying me, say, hey, could you please talk softer on the phone or take your phone calls outside, or please don't bring a stinky lunch. All right. So now we're looking very specifically at the action. If we have unmet performance expectation in a way that a product is being developed, we're saying, hey, don't just say that was wrong. Say specifically, next time, do this. So we're getting very specific in the action in our corrective feedback. A couple of faux pas, a couple of downfalls that can sabotage corrective feedback is grouping is one. So grouping is whenever everybody in the team is giving a subpar performance. And so we excuse unmet performance expectations as a social norm. Be mindful of grouping and don't excuse that as a social norm, but instead say, how can we all be better? So we're giving very corrective feedback to the group as a whole. We also want to be very specific in addressing those frustrations on a one-on-one basis, not saying, hey, we all think, right? So it's very easy to say, we all are frustrated with the performance that you are giving. Instead, say, hey, this is a personal observation that I have seen. Have a one-on-one conversation. And then if that does not work, then you can involve other people. But having everybody come in all at once as an intervention the first time that you see unmet performance expectation will oftentimes leave the team member feeling attacked, feeling very defensive, and it can affect trust within the team. So you want to be mindful of being very personal within your corrective feedback. The next purpose of performance feedback is to encourage desired performance. Again, whenever you're encouraging desired performance, you want to be very specific to get strategic. So oftentimes as a coach, I hear team members say, and I hear coaches say, hey, good job, well done, keep up the good work. And while this is really nice to hear, and it's encouraging, the player leaves not knowing what behavior should be repeated. And so knowing the purpose is to encourage desired performance. I have to ask myself, what behavior do I want repeated? What behavior do I want encouraged? I want to get very specific to get strategic. And then the next purpose of performance feedback is to coach. All right, it is to coach. So this is building upon existing performance. So in this situation, we also want to get very specific so that we can get strategic moving forward. The person that is receiving that feedback should walk away from that conversation with concrete knowledge of what action steps they should take to improve performance, whether it be correcting undesired behavior, encouraging desired behavior, or coaching or building upon current behavior. So yeah, as I know the different purposes of my performance feedback, it's really beneficial as I am formatting how that conversation is going to go. So I'm beginning with the end in mind. This is what success of this conversation is going to look like. Yeah, Jason had a good, you annoy me is personal. The thing that you do annoys me is impersonal and focuses on the action that could be considered problematic. That is correct. And it brings me to my last really important point, which is the way that we give feedback. Right now in 2021, we have more mediums of communication than ever before. So we can use email, Slack, phone call, video chat, face-to-face, letters. There's so many different ways that we can give feedback and that we can communicate with our teams. I always encourage leaders to look at the complexity of the feedback and the emotion of the feedback in determining the best method of communication. See, with every form of communication that we are giving, there is a span of time in between each feedback loop for questions to arise and for emotions to build. This is a highly desired effect if it is something like a love letter. So this is actually called the love letter effect, in which there is a span of time in between each letter that is being received for the person to ponder the words, for the emotion to build, for you to think about the sentences that were written in the letter. But if I'm sending an email about somebody's personal performance, then that is a span of time also for emotion to build, for you to ponder on the words. And that can be an undesired effect. If we have a communication, if we have a message that is highly emotional, which usually personal performance feedback is, then we want to be as personable as possible. So if I have something that's highly emotional or highly complex, meaning there's going to be question and answer, then I want to be in a situation where I have very fast feedback loops, meaning a video call, a phone call, or face-to-face. Those are going to be my most preferred methods of communication. If I have a message that is more informational, that is not very emotional, that doesn't have a lot of questions, then I can send a message or I can send a Slack message, I can send an email, I can send a text, because that won't require as fast of feedback loops. So those are the two major factors that I keep in mind whenever I am deciding the best method to deliver my communication. Oftentimes our message of communication, as we're determining our message of the different purposes, our message is fine, but the method that we use can be a major hindrance in the effectiveness that our communication is being received. I'm seeing Patrice ask, it seems more difficult to give feedback remotely than face-to-face. Any tip for our current constraints? Yeah. So honestly, building a relationship over time is going to be huge, especially with a remote team. I have a background in working in human resources, and it can be very easy in HR to have the only correspondence that you have with HR being a negative one of being counseled or terminations or things like that. And so we had to be very intentional to make sure that we're having other conversations. And so by having other conversations about checking in, how are you doing? How can I be a resource? How can I help? As we're having those conversations, I am getting more feedback and I'm taking more notes of your facial expressions, of the way that you speak, the way that we are communicating. And so I'm building that rapport and I'm able to take more notes so that if I have to give corrective feedback, then I'm in a position to read those cues better. So building relational capital is something that takes time, but building relational capital, especially in a remote team, is critical to giving great performance feedback. Yeah, that's the biggest advice that I could give. Yeah, I've been with teams that don't have a lot of relational capital, and that is their biggest hindrance to great performance feedback. And that applies to both in-person and remote, but especially in remote, that's going to be a major influence. And my last point is the last thing that I really want to share with you is making sure that you're not the only person that is giving performance feedback. We want to have feedback ownership within our team. So the ideas that I shared with you today of setting expectations, it's not just me setting expectations for my team. It's our team setting expectations for each other. It's not just me giving corrective feedback and encouraging feedback. It's equipping everybody in our team to have ownership and have confidence to give feedback effectively. So actually asking for the insight of others on your team will create a platform for more ownership and more feedback to be given throughout the entire team. As a coach, I shouldn't be the only voice on the field. And honestly, there are times whenever I shouldn't be the loudest voice on the field. There should be other people on our team that have the confidence and feel like they have the ability to share their feedback as well. And so I do that by asking for their opinion and asking for their insight and equipping them to give effective performance feedback as well. Now, I've given you a lot of information today. We've gone through a lot of different activities, given you a lot of phrases. I hope that this was helpful within your frameworks and how you are giving your performance feedback. And all of this does remind me of a time whenever I was coaching and I had a young lad that was so excited for his first day of football. He was about 6 years old and he came running out onto the field and he began yelling, "Pass, pass, pass!" And I noticed that he was yelling pass even whenever the other team had the ball. And he was even yelling pass whenever he was miles away from the action. And I noticed that he was yelling pass even whenever he had the ball. And so he was running with the ball going, "Pass, pass, pass." And so I looked at him and I said, "Achinthia," that was his name. I said, "Achinthia, why are you yelling pass?" And he looked up at me and he said, "Miss Emberman, I do not know what it means. I only know it is a football word." And sometimes it can be really easy to hear all of these different words that we've learned today of proactive conversation, fundamental attribution error, what, why, corrective, encouraging, coaching feedback. We have great frameworks. We have to have proactive conversations. Let's give great performance feedback. Because we know that these are really great words and they can lead to really big goals. But if we're in the wrong position, or if we're miles away from the action, or even if we have the ball and we don't know in which direction we're going, then saying these words are not only ineffective, but they're actually detrimental to our overall communication. Eventually, the team's going to tune you out. But if we first take the time to clarify our expectations by clearly communicating our what and our why, and we effectively communicate how, and we allow space for, and we allow opportunity within our how. If we have proactive conversations, we're mindful of the fundamental attribution error and clearly ask, what are our intentions? If we get very specific to get strategic and come into our conversations with a game plan, knowing the intended purpose of our conversations, then we'll be in a position to yell pass, to receive the ball, to move forward, and to score really, really big goals. So I am going to open it up now to any sort of questions that you have for me about performance feedback. Any questions that you have for me about performance feedback and some challenges. I know I had a couple questions about remote teams specifically. Moving forward. I am going to put, the buzzwords are a lot. Yeah. I am going to put my LinkedIn as well. So I'd love to connect if anyone has any follow-up questions.
Hi, Amber. It's Jason.
What's up, Jason? Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. Just wondering if you have any kind of guidelines or framework that you'd recommend for people in leadership positions looking to get feedback from their team members. So we talk an awful lot about how leadership's role is to provide feedback to their team. But my experience as a leader is I'm still just making it all up as I go along, just like I was doing when I was not a leader. So I could probably benefit from some feedback from my team members, letting me know how they think I'm doing as a leader.
Mm-hmm. So two major things. First, asking for it is, is like the most simple answer. But I found that, and you may have seen this too, Jason, is sometimes people are hesitant of, oh, that's my boss, he signs my check, he's my leader, am I actually safe in giving this feedback? So asking for it is the easiest thing. But I find that there's a lot of work on the front end. So I will ask more one-on-one, really from a standpoint of maybe less personal feedback first. So, hey, let me give you an example. Within my company, within the Pathways group, we were working on a project, and I started first off by asking, hey, I'm working on this project. What feedback do you have? And establishing that rapport of a person can give me suggestive, corrective feedback, and I'll listen to it and take action. So I'm not going to get hurt, even though it's my idea, right? So there was this level of establishing trust. First, I started asking from more of an impersonal side before, hey, we haven't really had a conversation before. Tell me how I'm doing as a leader. Sometimes that can cause some hesitation within the team. So by first asking on a smaller scale, we were able to establish trust. And then the team members were able to see how I would respond as a leader. Am I going to be hurt by that? Am I going to be emotional? Am I not going to take action? Am I just asking because I'm supposed to? Right. So they were able to see on a small scale, okay, whenever she's asking for feedback on a project or on an idea, this is the way that this person responds to that feedback. So that was really big on the first side, is asking on a small scale, and then also being in a position to take action. But before I was at the Pathways group, I was actually with a company, and we were in a position where it was going to be about a month before we could take any sort of action based off of our feedback, based off of feedback. That said, okay, rather than asking for it now and then waiting a month, why don't we communicate the position that we are at within the company, right? So we were working on a lot of projects, and we said, okay, we're in the middle of January, it's going to be February before we can ask for feedback, and that we can take any action based off of the feedback that we receive. So let's wait till we're in a position to actually take action. And so that's what we did to really communicate to the individuals in the team that their voices were going to be heard and they weren't just speaking out into a void. So those are the two biggest hesitations that I see, is that the leader is asking because they're supposed to ask, or if the leader is going to be very emotional or take it very personal. And so the way that I've found to establish that trust is by asking on a non-personal level first, and then building that trust. So whenever I get to hey, how am I doing as a leader? They already have some idea of how I'm going to respond, and they don't have to respond hesitantly or with fear. I don't know if that's helpful to you or not.
No, that is super useful. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Let's see. In large companies, we use engagement surveys, but face-to-face feedback from team members directly is my preference. Oh, yes. In response to that question. Yeah. Yeah. And those large company surveys can be helpful, but I find that I get the most feedback whenever I've established that trust first. Asking for feedback is a very emotional, a very personal question to ask, especially if we're talking about personal performance. So establishing trust on the front end is massive. How do you handle the generational gap within a team? Ooh, I like that question. All right, so it's very similar to the trust and relationship. If I'm giving one-on-one, I'm a Gen X and someone is a millennial. We have members on our team that are boomers and Gen Z as well. So we have a wide variety within our organization as well. So it's very similar. So I'm going to answer this two different ways, because I know there's two major types of performance feedback, of formal and informal. So I want to make sure I'm answering this whatever way you're meaning this. So with informal feedback, that's going to be the same on the relationship building side, right? So with each person in your team, you should be adjusting your communication style to meet that person where they're at. So on an informal side, I am first going to get to know the person, see their preferences and communication style, so that I can communicate them the best way possible. If they want more direct communication, more indirect communication, that's going to be more on a face-to-face level. If I'm giving a formal feedback, so if I'm doing an annual performance review, then I really want to make sure I'm communicating that what and that why. Yeah, so Gen X, so millennial, what am I supposed to do? Why is that important? I find that there's a big generation gap between who puts emphasis on the what and who puts emphasis on the why. So there's going to be I see a big gap within that. And so I want to make sure that I'm communicating the expectations first. And I generally am more of a Likert scale, maybe more direct on a formal review, and then allow opportunity for more conversation in the informal review. I don't know if that was helpful, but yeah. So it depends on if I'm doing informal or formal, but if I'm doing a formal review, I make sure I'm really, really clear on the expectations, and then I can be very direct on my formal review. If I'm having an informal conversation, then I can alter my communication style to fit that preference of the individual accordingly. Yeah, I know that whenever we talk about performance feedback, there's generally two major sections, and we were focusing more on the informal side today, but formal feedback is a totally different, that's another presentation that I have. So I will say while we're on the topic of formal review, oftentimes, before I go, are there a lot of people in this team that do a lot of formal reviews? I want to make sure I'm using your time wisely. Okay, I'm saying a couple do. Yeah, okay. whenever I use formal reviews, the focus of those performance reviews dramatically affect the focus of the performance. And so we actually saw this, we've seen this on a corporate level, we've seen this in dev teams, but going back to the football example, we were doing performance reviews for our players because they had to upgrade within the academy, right? So we had to decide what level they were going to play at. And we found that whenever we were giving performance feedback and performance reviews solely based on the individual's performance, the focus of our team members was dramatically solely on their performance. And so we had players that were somewhat okay with the fact that we were losing games because they themselves were the ones scoring goals. Even though we lost 10-2, they scored 2 goals. And so there was a level of okayness there. And within corporate teams, we see the same things. If our performance reviews are only based off of our individual performance, that can dramatically affect the focus of our success. And so what we did within our reviews is we had over 50% of the reviews was dependent upon your contribution to team success. Not necessarily team success, but your contribution to team success. Meaning, are you offering help whenever team members need it? How are you handling challenges? Are you being a leader within the team, right? So we were looking at those concepts as well. And so what we found is that whenever we altered the scorecard, the focus shifted from the scorecard to the scoreboard. And so it's really, really, really important to identify what you're doing, right? It's that whole what and why, right? So how are you measuring success within your scorecard? And why is that important? And is that being very clearly communicated to your team? I am a big proponent, since then we've done that in several corporate teams, of adding in a major aspect of that scorecard, including the questions of how you are contributing to team success. Again, that doesn't mean that the team has to be, if our team was still losing 10-2, there's only so much you can do for that. But there is an aspect of, are you willing to help out? Are you willing to step up? How are you facing challenges? Are you leading the team? Are you taking over? Are you asking others? Are you empowering others within your team? And so we would ask these types of questions whenever building our scoreboard or whenever building our scorecards. And that dramatically affected the focus and the outcomes of our team.
All right, this has been really fantastic. We are up against 6 o'clock, so we are out of time, right on time as far as I'm concerned. Thank you so much, Amber. This was fantastic. I came away with a bunch of insights from this and a lot of great reminders. I think you've repackaged some of the things that I'd heard before in a really novel way that hopefully get them to stick in my head. A lot of great examples, and I hope that everybody else got some excellent value out of this. And we will see you next month.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, folks.